This is the White Coat Investor Podcast, Milestones to Millionaire, celebrating stories of success along the journey to financial freedom.
This is Milestones to Millionaire Podcast number 145. Family Doc gets back to broke. Everyone has a story, different needs, wants, and goals, and how to attain them. Your story determines your solution. Whatever your situation and story, locum tenens should be part of the conversation. How do you find out if locums is a good option for you? Go to an unbiased, informative source like locumstory.com. You'll learn all the ins and outs of locums, details on travel and housing, assignment coordination, tax information, and more. You'll also hear firsthand stories from locums physicians from all walks of life, so you get a bigger picture of the diverse options. Get a comprehensive view of locums and decide if it's right for you at locumstory.com. This is the Milestones to Millionaire podcast, though. This is driven by you, your experiences, your successes, and we want to highlight those successes to use them to inspire others. When you're in the trenches of accomplishing things financially, paying off student loans, getting back to broke, figuring out contracts and figuring out retirement accounts and putting an investing plan together and working your way toward being a millionaire and becoming financially independent. When you're in those trenches, sometimes you don't necessarily need more knowledge. You just need more inspiration to keep your nose down, keep working toward them, to stay the course with your financial plan. And that's the point of this podcast, is to realize you're not alone. This is a community of white coat investors. We all have our own individual goals. Yes, it's a single player game. You're not competing against anybody else, but it sure is nice to sometimes hear that other people are struggling with the same stuff you're struggling with. If you'd like to come on the podcast, you can apply whitecoatinvestor.com/milestones, and we'll celebrate any milestone with you. I don't care what it is. And, it's kind of fun to have some of the unique ones from time to time. But let's get our guest on today. Trevor has become back to broke, and we're going to celebrate with him. Stick around afterward. We're going to talk a little bit about wills, why you need one, maybe what should be in it, what shouldn't be in it. Our guest today on the Milestones to Millionaire podcast is Trevor. Welcome to the podcast, Trevor.
Thanks for having me.
Tell us what you do for a living and how far you are out of training, what part of the country you're in.
Yeah, so I'm a family medicine outpatient only. I work 4 days a week just doing general family medicine, mostly adults and older. I'm just past my 2 years out of residency milestone.
Okay, you're in the Midwest or East Coast, West Coast? Where are you at?
I'm in the South.
South, okay.
Mm-hmm.
Very cool. All right, and what are we celebrating today with you?
I'm back to broke.
Awesome.
I have a positive net worth.
This is one of my favorite milestones because it is so hard to obtain. It's the one that gets you the momentum and gets you moving. Okay, well, let's run the numbers.
Sure.
Your net worth when you applied was $37,000, so you just barely passed zero.
Yep. And
tell us about your assets.
Yeah, so it's actually jumped up recently because I got a signing bonus for a new job I'm going to, but I can't really, that's flexible cash, so not really included. But mostly divided up about equal amounts in equity of our home, as well as that large savings account from the signing bonus. Pretty large chunk in my 401k, 15 to 20,000 in our HSA, and my wife's old 401k from a previous job. We have somewhere around 10K in each of our Roth IRAs, and then 8,000 in an old SEP IRA from one of my wife's former jobs as well.
Okay, so something around $150,000 in investments and savings, yep. And about that same amount in equity on the home.
Yeah, that's about right.
So tell us about the debts. Tell us about the liabilities on the other side of the ledger.
That's the fun part. Luckily, I've got it down to four separate debts. I have the mortgage on the home, although that's been paid down quite a bit because we've been living in it for 2.5 years. And student loans, I have 170 right now. My wife has 19, a little bit less than 20 on hers. And then we have 24,000 on a car, but the car has a 0% APR. So that's helpful. It's more like a bill than a loan is how I look at it.
Yeah. So let's go back here. You said You're 2 years out of training. You've been in your house for 2.5 years. I assumed you stayed where you were training then.
Yeah. So 2 years out. Well, so we moved towards the end of my training and didn't start working for a few months, if that kind of makes more sense.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Yeah. That helps explain it a little bit.
Yeah.
So this is the house you bought when you came out.
Yep.
So how did you decide how much house to buy and how to pay for it?
Yeah, it's hard to say. Well, I knew my contract, I had roughly how much I would be taking home, and then effectively used my uncle's a realtor. And so knew the kind of area and what physician loans were available with lenders, and basically just a calculation on what the monthly mortgage would be. And could I afford that with what I knew our other budget items to be? I actually bought a house towards the end of second year of residency as well. So I'd already been a homeowner and kind of roughly knew what my mortgage, in percentage wise to what my resident salary was, and then what I was moving up to as an attending, because all else equal what our budget line. So I've been reading your stuff for so long. I'm a big budgeter as far as knowing where all my pennies are going, as I describe it to my wife, and I knew I could just scale that up based on what I was going to be making.
So did you sell that other house?
Yeah, yeah. I actually sold it to our neighbor, our next door neighbor.
I imagine
So
given the timing, you did okay on that.
yeah, did just fine.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. All right. So tell me about your student loan plan. What are you doing with your student loans so far? What's the plan in the future?
Yeah, so I started out on repay throughout residency, and that was the plan for a little while. But when I got out, I didn't know if I was going to 100% work for a 501(c)(3. Family medicine, can be in a lot of different environments, and I didn't know if that's what I wanted to do forever. So actually, right before the pause on payments was extended even further, I guess the first time, I don't know which time we're on by now, I refinanced with a private company. So my timing couldn't have been worse. But luckily, I got it down. I have them at in the low 3%. And so I've just been paying that way. My job here does a little bit of loan repayment as well, which is helpful. But so far, it's just been another, line item in the budget. And then any sort of big windfalls like bonuses or things like that, a large chunk of that goes to loans.
How long until you think you'll have them paid off completely?
Probably 3 years. So we'll probably look at 5 years out of training, they'll be gone.
I suspect it's going to be sixes as to whether you refinanced or not. Sure, those folks got 0% for a few years, but they're
Sure.
now stuck at 7% and you're at
Yeah.
3%. So
Yeah.
over the next few years, you may end up coming out ahead because of that. It's not necessarily a mistake, I wouldn't say, but it's one of those things that nobody expected that to happen and
Yeah. Right.
to go on for 3 years. So,
Sure.
all right. Well, let's talk a little bit about kind of your upbringing. Was there anything in your upbringing that affected how you manage money, or your parents helped pay for anything, or give you an
Yeah.
inheritance, or
It's hard to say. I grew up very comfortable in my upbringing, but money wasn't really talked about very much, especially not in specifics. I'd never heard of a Roth IRA or investing in anything, or differences in way salaries are paid or anything like that growing up. I didn't have any help with school or inheritance, although I did get academic scholarship for undergrad. So I didn't pay for undergrad and then just started loans in med school. But once I had loans in medical school, it was like, this is adult time. I have loans that'll need to be repaid at some point and stuff. So I kind of dove whole hog into reading about it. Made it part of my job, especially towards the end of medical school. Because like a lot of med students these days, especially residency was my first job. My first time I was getting a paycheck was intern year, so I was very worried about that, especially third year and fourth year of medical school, thinking, okay, I got to figure out how am I going to get paid, how am I going to pay these loans off soon. So I just really dove into it.
let's talk a little bit about the numbers. What was your worst net worth? How negative did you get?
I think I was looking back at the what time of my life. I think probably negative 300 at one point. Yeah.
What's your household income been on average since you became an attendant?
Since attending,
Hmm.
yeah, average about 280.
Okay, so basically half of what you've earned has gone toward building wealth.
Yeah, that sounds about right.
We
Yeah.
just look at what's going on. So, how did you and your spouse get on the same page as putting half your income toward building wealth?
Yeah. Yeah. So basically, my wife is very good at budgeting and staying within her means and those kind of things, but she's also very anxious in talking about money. Even if we are doing okay in each of our situations that we have been, it's been like we have to sit down and talk about this, just to say that we're not living in the gutter. We're not going to have no money left. But she's always very open to that and kind of trusts me to read about it and then talk with her about here's what I've read, here's what I think we should do. And so we basically had like, quarterly budget meetings. She would generally, bake cookies to kind of soften the blow that we're about to talk about finances. And then we would eat our cookies and would say, here's where all our money is, here's where it's going, and here's what we're looking at in the future. And so we just kind of stayed like that. Even now, all of our basically 2 years out of residency, where we are, most of our expenses are set. Like, here's what we spend on things. My kids are 3 years old and 1 year old, so they don't have a lot of there's no T-ball yet and things that we have, untold expenses. And so we know here's what we spend each month, here's what I'm making. And she trusts me to kind of divvy it up into the percentages we talked about. And, we wrote an investor policy statement too. So a couple of years ago, we wrote it all out. So if I ever have a question, what did I say we would do if this happened? I look back, okay, here's when I was of sound mind and body writing this. What did I say we would do? And then we stick to it.
What's the biggest disagreement you guys had in one of those family financial meetings?
Sometimes it comes down to spending on like small things. It took a while for us to both be okay with spending on things that we just enjoy. For a while we were like, oh, we can't spend a dime on anything other than like survival. And especially during residency, she was the main breadwinner. She's a physical therapist, so she had a full-time job, and I'm sitting here with my, 50K, 80-hour work weeks. And so it was really important for us to stick to the plan. And now that we've gotten out, we've had to really talk about, hey, it's okay to spend these kind of things, and we don't have to necessarily talk about everything we want to buy at this point, unless it's something.
Which one of you is the bigger cheapskate?
I don't know about cheapskate, I would say. She's less likely to spend than I am. Yeah.
All right. Well, so let's say there's somebody else out there, they're coming out of school, they owe 300 grand or 400 grand or whatever. They want to do what you did. They want to be back to broke and en route to paying off these student loans and building wealth and, on track to become millionaires. And I think you estimated 5 years or something. What advice do you give that person?
So basically, two types. I have more broad advice overall for finance, especially with those in the medical profession, and that's to treat it like studying. One thing, regardless of specialty or environment that you're in, by the time you get through residency and as an attending, you're good at studying something, sticking to a plan, nailing down information, even if it's just cramming for something. You're good at retaining information and using it in your life. And if you can just send a small portion of your energy towards personal finance, you can reap major benefits. Something like, 10 to 15% of what you need to know, and then you're set for the other 80 to 90. And so that's kind of how I approached it. I said, I had to study about different diabetes medications. I had to study about how to, whatever guidelines I'm looking at. I need to also look at like, what are the evidence-based guidelines for setting yourself up in your investing future or paying off your student loans. And I would write it out. I'd write out, okay, here's the income-based repayment programs. Here's how they work. Write it down just like I would when I'm learning anything else. And so I've tried to do that when I have residents with me or medical students. I say, medicine is all encompassing. Your whole life always will be learning medicine. But you need to put some percentage into how do I make money so I can continue to live and set myself up in the future. That's my more broad advice. And then my more specific advice is if you're paid by RVUs, track your own RVUs.
Do you have bad experience where the lawyer tracking did not match your tracking?
Yeah, you could say that. And it hasn't been that bad. I wouldn't call it bad, but I've tracked mine since, the first time I ever stepped foot in this clinic. And it has led to a lot less headaches than some of the other physicians and NPs that I work with, because not only is it good for you to know exactly what you're doing, so you can use it, say you interviewed another job, say you're talking about one in the future, you can say, here's my numbers exactly. It also helps to keep, administrative pressure off of you some. Once your admins learn, at least in my experience, that you're tracking everything down to the, dollars and cents, then they leave you alone generally.
The truth is that which is measured tends to increase.
Yeah, that's right.
You're learning, well, that, has this many RVUs. And by doing things this way, I was able to get this many RVUs today.
Yep. Very important.
So I suspect that's probably had a significant effect on your income too.
Big time.
Yeah, awesome. Well, good advice. Well, Trevor, you've done awesome. You should be very proud. You and your wife should be very proud of what you've accomplished. This is no small feat to get back to broke, just a couple of years out of training. You will soon be out of student loan debt. You will soon be millionaires, and just snowballs from there. And your financial success is going to help you to be a better partner to your wife, a better practitioner to your patients. And it's going to help you accomplish amazing things. So, congratulations to you. And thank you so much for coming on the Milestones to Millionaire podcast to share your story with others.
Thank you, sir. I appreciate it.
All right, another great interview. I love having these interviews with people early in their financial careers, a year or two out. They paid off student loans, or they become back to broke, or they hit $100,000 net worth, or they bought their first car with cash, or whatever it might be. These kind of early milestones, because they really set you up. They really give you momentum as you move later in life. Yeah, we'll celebrate, your decamillionaire-hood when you hit that too. But it's cool to see people getting started. And I think those are really inspirational for people. All right, I promised you at the beginning, we were going to talk a little bit about wills. And for a lot of you, the only estate planning you need to do is a will. Okay? If you have any significant amount of assets, or if you have minor children, especially if you have minor children, you need a will. Right? And wills aren't that hard to do, right? You don't actually even need a lawyer to do a will. There's plenty of online resources you can do it with. And you could even, in a lot of states, you can write a will on a napkin, but you need to understand your state requirements, right? Handwritten wills aren't legal in every state. Like Georgia, for instance, they're not legal there. They often also have to be signed in the presence of at least two witnesses, right? There's no point in doing a will if it's not going to be valid. So make sure you understand your state rules if you try to get super creative about this. But I think it's worth at least spending a couple $100 on an online, will creating software to do this. If not, going to see an attorney, spending a little bit more, and having someone you can ask questions to and to draft up, the most professional looking will you can. But here's the deal. Here's what needs to be included in there. You need an executor. Okay, that's the person who's going to carry out what the will says you need to do. You need the beneficiaries, the people that are going to get stuff in the will. And you need to describe how you actually want your assets to be distributed. But perhaps the most important part of the will is to name the guardian, the person that's going to take care of your minor children. And that does not have to be the same person that manages the money on their behalf. In fact, there's a lot of benefit to not having it be the same person. We elected to have it be different people. We chose someone that we thought could manage the money well to manage the money, and somebody we thought could raise the kids well to manage the kids. But I think by having two people involved there, we keep a little bit of checks and balances in the system. You may or may not choose to do that. I'm sure it would be a little bit more complicated for our guardian if they didn't have direct access to the money, but we think that's not necessarily a bad thing. A lot of people will keep a list of their main assets and liabilities in the will as well, but keep in mind that may need to be pretty general, or the will is going to need to be updated more than you may want to do. Here's some things maybe you don't want to put in your will. All right. One is conditional gifts. Okay. If you are only going to give an inheritance based on certain conditions, you probably need a trust, right? And if you need someone to have like a spendthrift trust because you can't trust them with a lump sum of cash, that's better done with a trust than through a will. Don't put anything in there that's owned like property that has a right of survivorship. If that's automatically going to somebody else, it doesn't need to be in the will. Same thing with all kinds of other things that have beneficiaries, like retirement accounts. Your Roth IRA doesn't need to be in your will. Your 401k doesn't need to be in your will. You just list beneficiaries with those accounts. Same thing with annuities, same thing with life insurance policies, right? They don't need to be in the will. They are not going to go through probate anyway. And so you can leave those out completely. All right. You also don't need to put your funeral arrangements or any personal wishes in the will. That can be like an attached letter to the will. It doesn't have to be, in the will itself. You can just have kind of a letter of instruction of what song you'd like sung at your funeral, or whether you want to be cremated or buried. That sort of stuff can be in a letter of instruction. It doesn't have to be in the will itself. But if you got minor kids, you need a will. Don't neglect this. It can be messy if you don't do this. And once you start accumulating assets, you ought to have a will as well. By the time you die, you're probably going to want at least a revocable trust. And you'll need some more complicated estate planning done at some point. But man, if you've had a kid and you don't have a will in place, you are definitely behind the 8 ball. Go get that done today. So our sponsor today has been Locum Story. And maybe you're curious about locums and how it might fit into your career story, but do you know all the different reasons physicians choose locums and how it works for them? At locumstory.com, you can hear firsthand stories as diverse as physicians themselves. There's not one solution for everyone. The variety of opportunities might surprise you. Locum Story is an unbiased educational resource that has tools that let you explore trends in your specialty and compare different locums agencies. There's even a simple quiz to see if locums is right for you. Do your own research at locumstory.com. It's easy. All right, we've come to the end of the podcast again. We love the podcast. We love spending time with you on it and hearing about your successes. It keeps us going and helps us to stay in touch with what's going on out there in white coat investor land. So keep your head up and shoulders back. We'll see you on the podcast next week.
The hosts of The White Coat Investor are not licensed accountants, attorneys, or financial advisors. This podcast is for your entertainment and information only. It should not be considered professional or personalized financial advice. You should consult the appropriate professional for specific advice relating to your situation.